The weekend. It's the 2-day pause, the exhale at the end of a long week. It's brunches, errands, family, and sleep. It feels normal, permanent, as if it were always here, but it wasn't. The 5-day, 40-hour work week we know today is not a natural state of being. It is not a gift. It is a man-made invention, a hard-won truce, paid for in blood, strikes, and, surprisingly, the cold pragmatism of one of history's greatest capitalists. This is the secret history of your weekend, and how the fight over time itself explains the world you live in. This is the Hindsight Engine. To understand the weekend, we must first go to a time without it, the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution. This new world was built on coal, steam, and human beings used as fuel. The average workday was not 8 hours. It was 10, 12, sometimes 16 hours. And the work week wasn't 5 days. It was 6, and often 7. In factories, steel mills, and mines, there was no distinction between Saturday and Sunday, only the relentless demand of the machine. Conditions were brutal. A moment of inattention could cost a limb. The air was thick with contaminants. Child labor wasn't a scandal. It was standard practice. This was a world of endless work. A population was, quite literally, working itself to death. But from this exhaustion, an idea was born. A simple, radical, almost utopian slogan, first voiced by a Welsh mill owner named Robert Owen in 1817. 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will. For decades, this 8-hour day was a dream. But by the 1880s, American labor organizations, like the growing Knights of Labor and the Federation of Organized Trades and Labor Unions, decided to make it a reality. They set a deadline, May 1, 1886. They demanded the 8-hour workday. When the day came, the response was electric. Over 300,000 workers across the United States walked off the job in the first-ever nationwide strike. The movement was centered in Chicago, a massive industrial hub. For 3 days, the city was shut down. The protests were loud, but largely peaceful. Then came May 4th. A crowd of a few thousand gathered in Haymarket Square to protest police brutality from the previous day. The rally was winding down. The mayor himself had been there and noted the peaceful atmosphere. As the last speaker finished, a column of police arrived, demanding the crowd disperse. And then, a flash. Someone, to this day, no one knows who, threw a dynamite bomb at the police line. The explosion was devastating. The police, panicked and enraged, responded with gunfire, firing indiscriminately into the darkness, into the fleeing crowd, and into their own men. When the smoke cleared, the human cost was stark. While exact estimates vary, at least 7 police officers and 4 civilians were dead. Dozens more were wounded. The Haymarket Affair, as it became known, was a catastrophe. It was also a turning point. The public, horrified by the bombing, turned against the 8-hour movement. The press branded the protesters as anarchists, terrorists. 8 men were convicted of conspiracy in a show trial, based on their political beliefs, not on any evidence they threw the bomb. 4 were hanged. The 8-hour day, and the dream of a shorter week, suffered a brutal setback. It was a massive propaganda victory for opponents, and for a time, the American movement seemed to die on the gallows with them. The Haymarket gallows cast a long shadow. For a time, the 8-hour day seemed dead, buried under accusations of anarchy. But the desperation that fueled it, the exhaustion from a life of endless work, that didn't go away. It simply simmered. 8 years later, in 1894, it exploded again. This time, it would paralyze the entire nation. This was the Pullman Strike. George Pullman, the railroad car magnate, had built a perfect company town just south of Chicago. When an economic depression hit, he cut his workers' wages by 25%, but refused to lower the rent they owed to him. Facing starvation, the workers walked out. The new American Railway Union, led by a man named Eugene Five Debs, organized a national boycott. Workers refused to handle any train in the country with a Pullman car attached. Within days, 250,000 workers were on strike. and the nation's transportation grid was completely frozen. But the railroads and the federal government had a new weapon. They attached mail cars to Pullman cars, instantly turning a labor dispute into a federal crime for obstructing the mail. President Grover Cleveland, ignoring the governor of Illinois, sent 12,000 U.S. Army soldiers to Chicago. The result was a war zone, riots, fires, and by some estimates, dozens of dead strikers. The strike was brutally crushed. Debs was thrown in prison. It was a total bloody defeat for labor. Or was it? Here is where the engine turns. Just 6 days after the strike was broken, a nervous President Cleveland, desperate to appease an outraged national workforce, quickly signed a new bill into law. It created a brand new national holiday, a safe one, to honor workers. Labor Day. The Pullman Strike failed, but it proved that the fight for time and dignity was now powerful enough to scare the federal government. It had forced a compromise, a hollow holiday perhaps, but it was a sign that the old world of endless work was beginning to crack. The fight for time went underground, simmering for decades, and then the idea found an unlikely champion, not a socialist, not a union boss, but the wealthiest industrialist on earth, Henry Ford. In 1914, Ford had shocked the world by doubling his workers' pay to $5 a day. It was seen as an act of madness. But Ford's motives were not primarily philanthropic, they were chiefly practical. He was pioneering the assembly line, a soul-crushing, repetitive, high-turnover job. The $5 day wasn't a gift. It was a business calculation to stop his best workers from quitting. And in 1926, he made his second calculation. He announced that all Ford Motor Company factories would move to a 5-day, 40-hour workweek. His competitors were appalled. Some accused him of setting a dangerous precedent for industry. But Ford's logic was, once again, brutally precise. First, his assembly lines were so efficient he could produce in 5 days what others produced in 6. A shorter week meant a more rested, focused, and productive worker, who made fewer costly mistakes. But his second reason changed everything. Henry Ford realized that if his workers were in the factory 6 or 7 days a week, they had no time to do anything else. Specifically, they had no time to be consumers. Ford needed people to buy his Model Ts, and not just buy them, but use them. He needed a population that took road trips, visited family, went to parks. Henry Ford didn't just invent the 5-day week, he invented the modern leisure consumer. He was building a market for his own product by giving his workers the time and the money to participate in it. Ford's model was persuasive, but not universal. By the 1930s, thanks to collective bargaining and changing company policies, the 40-hour week was already a growing trend. It took one more global economic catastrophe to make it the law of the land: the Great Depression. With unemployment at 25%, the logic changed again. The government, under President Franklin D. Roosevelt, saw the 40-hour week not as a luxury, but as a necessity. The thinking was simple: if one man works 60 hours, that's a job. If you force that employer to hire 2 men for 30 hours each, you've just cut your unemployment. It was a work-sharing program. After years of intense political battles and resurgent union organizing, President Roosevelt signed it into law, the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938. It didn't invent the 40-hour week, it codified it. It took this growing trend and made it a mandatory baseline for millions of American workers. Crucially, it didn't forbid working more than 40 hours, it just made it expensive by mandating time-and-a-half pay for overtime. And there it was, not a gift, but a complex machine built from 3 different parts: the socialist dream of the 8-hour day, the capitalist pragmatism of Henry Ford, and the economic desperation of the Great Depression. Today, we argue about remote work and 4-day weeks and the right to disconnect. The battlefield has changed, but the commodity is the same. Time. Your time. The weekend is a reminder that the way we live is not set in stone. It is a product of history, a structure designed, fought over, and built by those who came before us. It's a structure you still live in, and that is how the Hindsight Engine works.